We're going to go right to the telephone because joining us from, I'm thinking Charleston, but he might be back home in Berkeley Springs. I'm not sure. State Senator Charles Trump. Charlie, welcome into Talk Radio.
David, good morning.
So first,
I'm in Charleston, but
Okay.
I'm headed home to the Panhandle soon.
All right. Well, you just go grab yourself a big 16-ounce can of Bud and just enjoy it on the way home. No, you would never do that, would you?
No, that would be imprudent.
But you deserve it. You deserve it. So let's get to this. What we know is not anywhere near what you know, but we do know that there has been a budget passed by both the Senate and the House. It has gone now to the governor. I'm interested in your thoughts about is this a good budget, a bad budget? Are there winners and losers in this budget? What's your take?
Well, all the above. There's plenty about it not to like. But, David, we have to pass a budget. West Virginia is not the federal government. We don't have the authority to print money, and we don't have authority to run a government without a budget. And so without a budget, on July 1st, the whole thing would come crashing down, and government would shut down in West Virginia.
To some degree, a budget, a public budget like this, a state budget, is a political document. I mean, the outcome is the result of people exercising different political points of view. What are some of the politics that guided this budget through? What are some of the political dynamics here as you see it?
Well, the first underlying problem with creating a budget, crafting a budget this year, is that we have structural imbalance. The revenues to the Treasury of the state of West Virginia have been falling off, and the growth in expenditures that's part of the budget have created a gap that we had to close this year initially of about $360 million. In the current fiscal year, it was more than that, $450 million. But it's projected that the spending recommended by the governor in his budget bill for the next fiscal year, so for your listeners, that means starting July 1st of this year, ending June 30th of 2017, the expenditures recommended by the governor exceeded the known revenues by actually beginning a total of $360 million. So the budget that we passed reflects cuts in spending exceeding $100 million. Some of those were proposed by the governor and adopted by the legislature, and other cuts found by the legislature. And the utilization of reserves from the state's revenue reserve shortfall fund, also colloquially known as the rainy day fund, of about $182 million.
Good morning, Senator. Bill Stubblefield.
Admiral, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And congratulations on yours and the others' efforts in working this budget. I have a couple of questions. One, you invoked the word balanced quite a bit. I did listen to the discussion yesterday, live stream, and I found it very fascinating and very informative as well. But you use the word balance. Now, my experience with budgets, both in organizations I've run and also boards I've sat on, is when expenditures are met by revenues. Now, if you may look at the total package, that may be the case. But this fix we're talking about, everything was resolved strictly through borrowing from reserves, and no new revenues. Would you speak to that, please? Again, my question is the definition of balanced.
Yeah, no, that's right. You're absolutely right. Balance in that sense means, in the context of a budget, means that you're not spending more. The state will not spend more than it has available to it to spend. Now, what it has available to spend in operating the state government are revenues that are paid to the state by taxpayers, the citizens, and reserves it has. So this budget is balanced with both of those, a combination of those, the revenues that the taxpayers will pay over the course of the year and be collected by the Treasury, and reserves of the state of $182 million. And that's after cutting the expenditures by more than $100 million. So I'll agree with you on this point. It is not balanced without the use of reserves. And that's the structural imbalance we have in West Virginia right now.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Jason Barrett, good morning.
Jason, good morning. How are you?
Pretty good. You know, there has to be a level of frustration, specifically in the Senate with the House, because, you know, the House was really kind of a roadblock, I think, in getting a better budget. And this budget is, in my opinion, incredibly fiscally irresponsible. But can you talk a little bit about the frustration and where do we go from here? I mean, if the governor vetoes this bill, which, you know, a lot of folks think he is, I'm not sure, but, you know, if he does, and you guys come back, is there any way, you know, the Senate has kind of been the adult in the room, so to speak, when compared to the House. How do you get anything out of the House that you guys can work with?
Well, I will tell you this, the Senate did try to advance a couple revenue measures, tax measures, to bring additional revenues to the budget. To address this problem that Bill discussed and that you're asking about, we're going to have to do it one way or the other. Either raise revenues or make further reductions to expenditures to bring this thing into operational balance. Obviously, you can't, a state cannot, for a protracted period of time, just rely on reserves to make the expenditures balance the revenues available. So it has been frustrating. I have voted for and am willing, continue to be willing to vote for revenue measures to bring extra revenues to the Treasury. That David's question about the politics, it's very complicated. You know, this budget isn't, you know, what I would describe as a perfect budget. But what it does do, Jason, as you know, is it allows the government to operate. And I am hopeful that the governor will sign this.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate your, you know, that it does need to happen. We do have to have a budget. We cannot shut the state government down. But this could be possibly the worst possible budget that could have come out of the legislature. Where do we go from here next year? What are our projections as of right now for next year? And clarify for me, I've seen a couple of reports. One report said there was $183 million that this budget dips into the rainy day. I've also seen $245. Can you talk a little bit about that and get clarification for me, please?
The number for the rainy day fund is 182, 183. There are, candidly, the budget includes sweeps of reserves from some other state operating accounts. So the rainy day fund is not the only place where the state has been stockpiling taxpayers' money for a time. So various department heads, as you know, end each fiscal year with reserves unspent. And so the budget includes some of those as well, in addition to cuts to operational expenses. Where we go from here is we have to continue to work and roll up our sleeves and find additional places to cut the expenditure side of the budget. And we have to work toward measures to bring additional revenues to the Treasury. I think we have to do both. I agree completely with the concerns that have been expressed by the governor and others about heavy reliance and utilization of reserves to pass a budget. However, the alternative at this moment, the shutdown of the government, and retirees who don't get their checks, state road workers who lose their jobs, public school teachers who lose their jobs, kids who just graduated from high school who won't be able to enroll in college because the promised scholarship doesn't exist. I hope your listeners understand that without a budget bill being passed, the state of West Virginia has no spending authority. The Constitution, Article 10, Section 3 of the Constitution says no check, no funds can be drawn upon the Treasury of the state of West Virginia without an appropriation. And the budget bill is the document by which the appropriations are made. And so every state employee is out of work at the end of this month without a budget.
This is Matt Miller. Senator Trump, let me jump in and kind of open a can of worms. I hear what you say with certain elements that are in this budget that, you know, if a budget is not passed, these funds are not there for very specific things, including the promised scholarship. I'm going to open it up by saying I somehow got through college back in my day without a promised scholarship. So are there too many sacred cows that can't be sacrificed when we look at trying to find ways to reduce this budget?
I'm not unwilling to examine the way we do anything that state government does, including the promised scholarship. But what you can't do, Matt, is you can't have people make plans for their lives on one set of circumstances and rules and then just yank it out from under them. That's cruel. We have kids who are already enrolled in college who earned those promised scholarships and are receiving collegiate education. They're right now working in summer jobs and wondering whether or not they'll be able to return to college in August. And if Governor Tomlin vetoes this bill, their educations are in jeopardy. Everything is in jeopardy. The state, if Governor Tomlin vetoes this bill, the state will not be able to pay its creditors, its bonded indebtedness, and it will destroy, without a budget, it will destroy the credit rating of the state that it would take a generation to recover from. Now, as I said, I think we need more cuts and more revenues to the Treasury, and we have been trying. And quite frankly, you know, we've had some obstruction from the minority party on that.
You're listening to Eastern Panhandle Talk, Dave and Matt, and joined by Bill Stubblefield and Jason Barrett in studio, and on the phone, State Senator Charles Trump, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and offering his viewpoint as to what's going on and why the state budget is so needed. Bill, you had a question?
Yes, I do. Governor, I thought you were extremely eloquent yesterday in making this point about the ramifications not passing a budget. But the governor has been very clear and very persistent in saying he's going to veto any budget that has what he views an excessive amount of money out of the reserves of the rainy day fund. Would it be fair to say that the Senate made a value judgment? They'd rather take the governor on this issue than take the House of Representatives on, or House of Delegates on. Would that be a fair statement?
No, I don't think so. Obviously, the House of Delegates and the Senate both passed this budget. Unfortunately, it was along party lines in essentially in both chambers. It was a straight party line vote in the Senate, and I think maybe there was one Democrat that voted for it in the House. I'm not sure, but it was essentially party lines vote. So if the governor vetoes this budget and retirees don't get their retirement checks, many of the people who worked their whole lives for the state of West Virginia and earned a retirement live pay period to pay period on those checks.
Senator,
and if the governor is going to veto it, it would have to be because he believes somehow that there's a chance to get a budget that's better than this one. There are many things about this budget, you know, I don't like. I would, if I had my personal preferences, I agree with the governor. We would utilize less of those reserves and raise some revenue. You know, I voted for a tax on tobacco, on cigarettes. We have not been able to get that through the legislature.
Senator, do you how much time do you have left? I mean, if the governor vetoes this bill, it's not like that's the end of it. He would certainly call you guys back, and you'd have the remainder of the month. Is that not correct?
Well, we haven't adjourned finally. You know, we haven't adjourned sine die, which is the complete end of the session. So we've adjourned to a date certain. Essentially next Sunday, I think the 12th, is when we return, no matter what. Under the Constitution, the governor has 5 days to veto this bill. If he does, then we could potentially return even earlier. If we hear a veto, we would have to. We'd have to resume work and deliberations. here's the thing, though, Bill. The passage of this budget gives the governor spending authority as of July 1st. We haven't adjourned completely, so there isn't any reason why, even if he signs this budget into law, we can't continue to work on measures to make further cuts where they're reasonable and doable, or raise additional revenue to the Treasury. Those things are still all before us, and we don't have to wait until the next regular session of the legislature in January to do that. And I think it's the intention of the President of the Senate to keep working on that. And I hope he will communicate that to the governor.
Senator Trump, you said a few minutes ago, at least you implied, that you're disappointed by the lack of cooperation from the minority party, the Democratic Party. Can you elaborate on that? And also, maybe, and I'll give you a compliment here too, because you are discussing this budget in a way that I find to be rational and centrist, and not wildly, partisan. Yet you did take a moment to say, you wish that there had been more cooperation from the other side. I'm interested in further thoughts on that.
Well, let me tell you what's been going on. When the governor convened us, in addition to introducing a budget bill, the governor proposed some revenue measures, specific bills to try to get additional revenues to the state treasury. And, one was a tobacco tax. We took it up in the Senate, and with the exception of Senator Corey Palumbo, who is a man among men, in my judgment, every Democrat in the Senate voted against raising taxes on tobacco products. Now, with the help of Senator Palumbo, the Republican majority was able to pass that bill in the Senate and send it to the House, where a majority of the Republicans voted in favor of it, and every Democrat voted against it, killing it. I've been having trouble. I've been having a lot of trouble for the last 2 weeks down here, 3 weeks now, reconciling the speeches we hear on the floor from Democrats about how we need to bring more revenue to the Treasury, and their actions in voting against and obstructing every revenue measure that their governor, that our governor, a Democratic governor, and the Republican majority tried to advance. I'm having a very hard time reconciling that.
Senator Trump from Charleston, I guess maybe still more work to do depending on what the governor does. Thank you so much for being with us today on Eastern Panhandle Talk. Great analysis. Safe travels home, my friend. And
hey, thank you. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you all. I would urge your listeners to call the governor and urge him to sign this budget. We cannot have, it would be catastrophic for a quarter of a century if this government were to shut down and this state were to fail to pay its creditors. Your listeners should call the governor and urge him to sign this budget into law, and urge all of us, Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, to continue to work to find that common ground that will allow us to bring this into structural balance. I'll take Bill's point that we have a structural imbalance now, and we can't continue into the future years to solve that by plugging it with money that exists only in reserves. Sooner or later, that gets depleted.
Well,
it's not a long-term solution.
We will let that be the last word before we take a break. Again, safe travels, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks,
Thank
Senator.
you, David.
Thank you.